But I believe that by overwhelming majority in all the Americas, you and I, in the long run, and if it be necessary, you and I will act together to protect, to defend, by every means at our command.
Welcome to the History in Motion podcast, where we discuss leaders, their decisions, and how they shape the world we live in today. Welcome to this episode of the History in Motion podcast, where we delve into the life and legacy of Albert Einstein, known not just for his revolutionary theories of relativity, but also for his profound impact on philosophy, politics, and human rights. Einstein remains one of the towering figures of the 20th century. Born in 1879 in Germany, his journey from a curious patent clerk to a Nobel Prize-winning physicist exemplifies the extraordinary potential of human curiosity and intellect. Today, we'll explore how Einstein reshaped our understanding of the universe and championed peace, equality, and social justice throughout his life. Join us as we trace back the enduring legacy of a man whose work continues to influence our world today. This is the History in Motion podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the History in Motion podcast. And our journey with antiquity has come to an end last week, and we've kind of zoomed forward about 2,000 years, and we're coming back to the modern time period. And we're looking at a couple of people over the next few episodes on just their scientific achievements, their leadership abilities within science. And we decided we might as well start with the big boy here, with Albert Einstein, and who, needs no introduction, is known for being such a groundbreaking scientist in the sense of his theories not only were so groundbreaking at the time, they're still even groundbreaking today. And it's even something that most young physicists struggle to wrap their head around. And I think it's going to be a really interesting episode because he's not a classically trained physicist going through what you would expect from the physicists of that time. He's really a pioneer in this kind of new way of thinking, and is coming from a little bit of an outsider, which I think kind of goes to show why he was so successful, because he's not coming through that tried and true process, and he's coming in with a fresh perspective that not a lot of people might have had.
Yeah, I think to your point about even young physicists struggling with some of his theories and published papers, as a self-professed amateur historian, like when I think about Einstein, what does everyone think of? E equals MC squared. But I promise 99% of people probably have no idea why they know that, or, like how groundbreaking that actually is.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I'm even thinking back to, my education. I remember using the formula and having a very general idea of how it works, but can I sit here and give you a whole explanation about what it is, why it's so important? Probably not. But I can tell you that Einstein's a pretty smart guy, and he knew what he was talking about. So I think maybe that's the extent I can go to on that famous little equation.
Yeah, this isn't a physics podcast, but yes. I think maybe just like an opening thought, when I sit down and I think about like a figure we're going to talk about, I always try to do like a brainstorming session by myself, and what do I actually know about this person? And my only note was like E equals MC squared, revolutionary scientist, but there's so much more to his life. And I think as you start looking at people that kind of fit this mold, and obviously, you could easily argue, Einstein kind of broke the mold with the work that he did, his tenure in academia, his life as a whole. There's something to say about people who are, have the capacity for this level of intelligence. And I think it often, creeps into how they, interact with other people in their social lives, their relationships. I thought of Tesla a little bit. I thought of Oppenheimer while I was researching. And I think we'll probably see some, similarities and some interesting compare and contrasts while we kind of work our way through this episode.
One of the things I was just thinking of as you were talking about how these guys are so out there and so different, and, not like your regular Joe. In the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there's a point in the movie where they prove that one of Einstein's theories is correct. And then one of the characters says to the other one, he goes, yeah, well, Einstein was probably one of them, referencing the aliens in the movie. So it's really to that point that when people are saying to have this level of genius, it's almost unhuman, and it's not something that our brains could even comprehend. But I think that's what, makes humans such an interesting species, that we can have these anomalies of people who come up and their brains just work in such a way that all the things click in the right way, and we can get these beautiful formulas and these beautiful theories. But also on top of that, we can get a scientist who's almost at like rock star status, where every, household name, even in his day, became very, very popular. That, I think, is what sets Einstein apart from maybe the rest of, some of the scientists we've talked about. People know a lot about Oppenheimer and a lot of other scientists based on their theories, but Einstein's like in a tier or maybe 2 tiers above everybody else, just because he's probably the only one that was able to do what he did from a publicity standpoint. And maybe Stephen Hawking is the only other one that people would maybe equate to this, but it's a very, very select club. And it'll be interesting as we go through today, not just to talk about his brilliance, but to talk about, why the media loved him so much, why people loved him so much, and why he still maintains that rock star status today.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest takeaways, at least from my perspective, and a bit of foreshadowing for the latter part of this episode, is just his work outside of, the scientific and academic realm. There is a lot more to this particular person than just his gravitas and his, mind-bending understanding of astrophysics and physics as a whole.
Yeah, he definitely knows a thing or two that we'll get into as we go along. But maybe we should start by Richie talking a little bit about his upbringing, because it's not as traditional as we thought, right? He's not, again, like we see with a lot of these physicists who are born into a world where, they're destined to go to university. They're maybe coming from a higher class of family. And it's not really like that for Einstein, right? It's a bit of a different trajectory that I think we'll come to see maybe helps build that change in mindset that's needed to come up with some of these theories.
Yeah, 100%. And I think we'll definitely see that in his family life, his early background, his education, his life as a student, and some of the, we'll call them peculiarities of his, his young self. But yeah, we'll get into his bio. So it was significantly shaped by his family environment. There's absolutely no way around that. He was born in Ulm, Germany in 1879. His parents were Hermann Einstein and Paulina Koch. They came from backgrounds that combined this kind of intellectual curiosity with this very practical business acumen. So from the practical business side, his father, Hermann, was an engineer and a salesman who had co-founded an electrical engineering company. This company was established in Munich in 1880. It manufactured electrical equipment, particularly generators based on direct current. This enterprise not only reflected the technical innovations of the era, but also the entrepreneurial spirit of the Einstein family. So maybe just a quick pause there, because I think already we're seeing something really, really unique from at least his father's side. And we'll talk about his mother a little bit, but he's already in this world where his father's an engineer. He's obviously has a scientific background. He's obviously educated. And, we're talking about 1880 here to be starting up a company that sells generators based on direct current. His dad's at the forefront of this kind of innovative wave of technology at this point in time.
Yeah, you're right. This is the electrification of the world is going into high gear. And we've talked about it in a previous episode with, Tesla and his alternating current, and Edison and the direct current. And this is all changing. But what I find interesting too is his father being an engineer, but also starting a company. There's always what I try to find for similarities with some of the leaders that we talk about is there's possibly this drive that his father has that he's pushing onto Einstein, this level of, hey, trying to do something new, trying to be innovative. And for a physicist, for example, you may come into a world where you learn all the theories and you're trying to expand on maybe what somebody else has done. But maybe for Einstein, and I'm maybe drawing a little bit of jumping to some conclusions here, but I always like to see when someone's parents have that entrepreneurial spirit, they're always trying to do something new. I wonder if those kind of thoughts and ideas propagated throughout Einstein. And then when he became a physicist, trying to say, hey, you know what, I'm not going to stick to the status quo. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to have that kind of thinking outside the box, always pushing the envelope type of mentality, and thus can create something new. There's obviously many years that it takes to get to that point, but I always like to draw those parallels between, people coming from, father was a physicist or father was maybe in a more conservative industry versus, hey, he's at the forefront of this electrical revolution, trying to build a business in what's going to become a hyper-competitive space. You can't just stick to the status quo. You always have to be changing. So I think there might be some interesting parallels there.
I think that's a great point. And I think there's also this kind of melding or this duality between his parents. So if we look at his mom, Pauline, she was also an educated woman from a family that was mainly involved in farming and milling. And it kind of suggests this blend of intellectual and practical interests in his mom's kind of family lineage. And like to your point, Paul, I think this mix of influences from both parents definitely had a huge part in nurturing Einstein's like later revolutionary approaches in physics, where he was kind of able to meld, these theoretical insights with empirical evidence to produce, the results that would obviously make him famous. To switch back to his father, Hermann Einstein, his company actually did not succeed as he had hoped. It brought on like tremendous financial stress to the family. And despite these challenges, the environment that Einstein grew up in was still very supportive and still emphasized intellectual development. And it remained crucial in shaping, his young education and his future pursuits. And I think it's kind of this intersectionality of, this intellectual stimulation on one side and practical challenges on the other that kind of characterizes Einstein's formative years, which kind of set the stages, to your point, for his later contributions to science and technology. So if we look at his like early educational journey, I think this is where things get really interesting. So his interest in science was evident from a very young age. He attended the Luitpold Gymnasium in Munich. It's actually now called the Albert Einstein Gymnasium in Munich, which is this like private school which provided traditional education, but it didn't necessarily, inspire young Einstein in a meaningful way. His fascination with mathematics and physics kind of grew outside of the formal curriculum, and it was kind of driven by his own explorations and reading. And probably an interesting footnote here was that he was also a very talented musician. He loved music. He went as far as saying that when he dreamt in music and he saw music, and he was kind of motivated by music when he was thinking about some of these like very out of bounds or innovative, physics and mathematical problems that he was kind of discovering on his own.
I'm going to draw the conclusion that, there's sound waves in music, and then ends up studying light waves. I think, we'll get into his thought experiments, but you can't overlook the fact that, being so interested in something and just thinking about the way his mind works and how he's able to link these things together. I think it's definitely something that he's going to draws upon for the rest of his life. And I wonder if too, on some of those thought experiments, how much he's leaning back to his love of music and knowledge around musical theory and that kind of stuff.
I think I can confidently say, Paul, you probably nailed that one, because it's hard not to kind of see the comparison there. It might not be like very obvious if you're not familiar with physics, which I am certainly not, but when it comes to, musical notation, the kind of study of music and musical theory, there definitely is some interplay there that I definitely could not do justice in describing, but at least at a high level, I think we can walk away thinking that there is a relationship between the two. And this is all before he's like 16. So at the age of 16, he takes the entrance exam to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School in Zurich. He excelled in physics and mathematics, obviously, but he did not pass the portions of the exam related to other subjects. So this would be like English, history, philosophy. He did okay, but he didn't really care about them. He was obsessed with mathematics and physics. That's what he cared about. And his shortcomings, did kind of present some barriers to him early, but he was undeterred. So he did end up completing a secondary education outside of Zurich at the Cantonal School of Aarau in Switzerland. It was a school noted for its innovative teaching methods and emphasis on conceptual understanding. And in 1896, Einstein actually renounced his German citizenship and enrolled back to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School, where he finally began his formal studies in physics and mathematics. This was after he took time to actually kind of upskill on the other courses that he had to get a passing grade in to get back into the Polytechnic School, because they wouldn't allow him otherwise. Crazy
thinking back in time to be like person who had to decline Albert Einstein from your school because his French score or his philosophy score wasn't high enough. And obviously doesn't know at the time, but I would love to be that person, be like, yeah, I probably missed the boat on that one. I don't know why we just didn't let the guy in and let him do his physics, but how are they to know? But I just find that to be an interesting little thought.
It is funny though, right? And I think it kind of speaks to our earlier point. This is someone who pushes boundaries, isn't necessarily conventional in his thinking or approach. And you kind of see this example kind of carry out in his early life. But yeah, so during his time at the Polytechnic School, obviously this is where he's exposed to some of the leading scientific thinkers of the time through readings recommended by his professors. He graduated in 1900, and this was after he produced a dissertation that was considered too focused and unconventional by some faculty members, which is kind of a reflection of his lifelong tendency, as well as to kind of establish these, to challenge established norms.
He's definitely a guy who seems like he goes, very deep into a few subjects. And he seems like he's also stubborn too. Like he's going into those subjects and he's sitting there and someone's like, yeah, but you got to think about these other things. And he's like, well, that doesn't interest me. I'm just going to keep studying physics instead of these other things. Or when he's doing his dissertation, probably going deeper into a certain area that he's interested in, despite the fact, what other people are telling him. So there's almost like this, it doesn't sound like rebelling against authority, but just letting his mind go in a direction that makes sense to him and not really thinking too much about, well, I need to, conform to some sort of norm here, or I need to listen to other people, which maybe helped him or didn't help him early on, but definitely later in his life, being able to think outside that established norm is, I think, part of the reason why he's successful as he is.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's like a great way to probably summarize like this kind of chapter or like, section of his life. If we look at his academic career, it's marked by this very early interest in like the theoretical underpinnings of physics. Even as a student, he questioned conventional teachings in light and electromagnetism, which, to your point, would lead him to develop his revolutionary theories. But even throughout his education, he showed a pattern of a very deep theoretical engagement with the subjects he truly cared about. And this was combined with a relative disinterest in more practical or empirical studies. And again, I think this is where you see this pattern starting to emerge that would carry on through his life. This pattern's kind of this like harbinger of his later scientific work, which would prioritize theoretical innovation over experimental physics, setting the stage for his groundbreaking contributions into the field that we're going to touch on very shortly.
Yeah, I think this is one big difference, right, we're seeing at this time is physicists really didn't separate themselves into theoretical physicists and experimental physicists like we would see probably within a decade of Einstein or even within his time. There was kind of an expectation to be able to do a bit of everything. But when people could see what Einstein could put together from a pure theoretical standpoint and the amount of time and effort it would take to be really good at one or the other, and I think as questions and concepts became more complicated, you can start to see that slow specialization into types of physicists, and then as they get deeper into different spaces. But yeah, I think it's just an interesting change that's kind of happening at this time where you see people who are just going to be very deep thinkers and can, change the world just with a piece of paper, not necessarily with, building some giant experiment.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is probably a good segue into some of his like notable achievements that, landed him on the map for the impact that he made and still has today, which is, the significantly looking at the field of physics and shaping the development of modern scientific thought. So this is where we start talking about his, broader achievements. So his work spans from these groundbreaking papers that were published in 1905. They're known as his Annus Mirabilis, which translates to the miracle year, where he kind of published these just heavy-hitting, earth-shattering papers that kind of really, from my understanding, shook the very foundation of what scientific and physics thought was at this point, which included the formulation of the general theory of relativity and the photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, and mass energy equivalence, which is, the only thing I knew about him before that, which is E equals MC squared.
And he's doing all this right while he's working at the patent office. Is that right?
Yeah, he's doing this all while he's working at the patent office. Yep.
Yeah, not bad for off the side of your desk sort of activity. And I think too, it goes to Einstein's. We talk about he likes to go very deep into certain things. He has a childhood where, it's maybe not the most stable, but I think it's very interesting that he's working at a patent office and he's seeing all these different ideas come in, and he's just very well read, right? He has to be able to do the job that he's doing. And so he's able to see things from a totally different perspective. And so he's not maybe going down necessarily the same path of a PhD physicist who's, staying within the textbooks and reading the scientific literature for a specific subject. He's learning all of these different things. And I think that's part, definitely helps him with, kind of writing some of those papers. But I think to your point there, these are 4 massive papers that really changed the world. And so I think maybe now we should just get into a little bit about, okay, these papers are coming out, but why do we see such an explosion of all this physics happening at this time? Because people have really called this the golden age of physics. And it really does, I wouldn't say it starts with Einstein. It does start within the late 19th century, but it really hits its stride with Einstein and then maybe peaks around, kind of the end of Einstein's I was going to say reign, more like era. So it happens when we've been talking about emperors and kings for too long. But kind of the peak of his life. And then, we start to see the quantum mechanics elements come in with Niels Bohr and Max Planck and those individuals. But really the key things that are happening at this time is the technology around science is really starting to grow. They're really able to start measuring things at a different level than they were before. So something as simple as a telescope or a particle detector. These are things that didn't exist in the same capacity in the past. We always know about Galileo building his own telescopes, but not to the level that we're seeing within this time period. We're starting to see too this cross-pollination of different types of research. So math is starting to merge more with physics, which really helps define some of these theories, because if you can prove it mathematically, you're pretty much on your way to having a pretty well-defined theory instead of them kind of being individual things. And on top of that too, we have the First and Second World War around the corner. Europe is at a point where they're at each other's throats. Like you have the Napoleonic Wars at the beginning of the 19th century. There's a lot of unrest that's happening, a lot of smaller wars, German unification's happening. And, like we've talked about on previous episodes, the European powers are at each other's throats. It's not stable, but they want to win these wars. They know wars are coming. So they understand that science is going to play a big role in this. So you start to see a lot of funding going into research, into government institutions, to really push the envelope on, we want to have the best scientists, because when this war does break out, we're going to be able to throw them at all of these types of problems. And then it's also like an ego thing as well. Hey, we have, the latest Nobel Prize was a German or a Russian or a Brit or a French. These are all things that they're can continuously try to do. But on top of that, they're not just sitting in their silos saying we're a bunch of German guys within this university who are going to just, research with each other. They're sharing ideas with all their colleagues, not only within Europe, but around the world. And so with the inventions that are helping with new communication technologies, and you can just share things a lot faster, they're able to share this information, but also get together for conferences and things. You have flight and you have faster railways, and you can get across the ocean in a reasonable amount of time. These are all contributing factors that just put all these people within a good space to think about these ideas, but then also collaborate in a way that really kind of creates a bit of an intellectual arm race where they're trying to get to the top. They're trying to outdo their colleagues and try to become, the next big, I was going to say the next big Einstein, but, the next big physicist, right? See, that's just how much he's in our common, thought. He's the peak. So everyone's trying to get to him. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at from a kind of a world sense of how physics is changing and how science is changing. And it's really a perfect storm to enable not just the ideas of Einstein, but all the brilliant people that he comes across in his life.
I think that's such an interesting way of phrasing it. Two things that really stuck out to me. One, I think the idea of an intellectual arms race is like very intriguing. I think that is like such an interesting way of looking at it, because you have like these multitude of factors. You have this massive like technological upheaval with communications that didn't exist before. You have this kind of nationalistic sentiment around, the First World War, the upcoming Second World War, and all these battles that are being fought, all kind of converging into, what, you wouldn't immediately assume that it's going to be the physicists of the time that kind of become like the forefront of where all these kind of factors kind of coalesce and converge to propel physics into the era that it kind of is like the golden era of physics at this point, right? All kind of like converging to really just transplant people like, Max Planck, Albert Einstein, we've talked about Oppenheimer, Bohr, to this kind of peak level within like the broader landscape.
For sure. Everything is kind of coming together that, many people have worked towards for so many years. We can't take away from the fact that Einstein wrote a lot of letters to a lot of colleagues, and he would always share ideas with people, and they would say, no, you're out to lunch on this one, or hey, you might be onto something here. And he would do the same to other people, right? So there's this consistent correspondence and this collaboration amongst these scientists. While they may have been fighting to be the best and to be the next one to discover a theory, they all kind of mutually knew that none of this was possible without each other. And so being able to work together and to consistently be curious, and we see that with Einstein, right? He's very well read. He's always trying to learn the newest things and just know everything that's going on. That's exactly what someone like he needs to be able to succeed in this world. So one of the big things and that he's known for are his theories of relativity. So we have special relativity and then general relativity. And their main focus is on light, but also on gravity as well. So coming up to the time of Einstein, gravity was this theory that was created by Newton hundreds of years ago. And Newton did a great job of defining it, measuring it, and everybody knew, okay, we can measure how much gravitational force we're going to have based on the size of the object, whether it's a planet, whether it's something smaller. We can measure all of these things, but there was kind of an elephant in the room for Newton. He didn't really know how gravity worked. Like, what is actually happening? What is this force of gravity? He had a theory that, if, say, for example, the sun disappeared tomorrow, we would instantly feel the gravitational effects on us instantaneously. He also couldn't explain some small nuances around the orbit of Mercury, for example. It was a little bit different than what his calculations were. So there was something else that was happening. So Newton's formulas, they worked for 99% of everything you would possibly need, but there was those small edge cases, which meant from a theoretical standpoint, something was missing. And so this kind of continued on for a long time where people would continually use Newton's theories. They were working well, except in these small cases. And, people really didn't know what to do. So as time went on, there was this theory of something called the ether. So the way to think about it is, if you have a sound wave needs some sort of medium to transfer the sound. So for example, we're having this conversation right now. It's traveling through air, then it's being turned into an electrical signal, and then it's being created on your end for vibration in the air, so you can hear what I'm saying. Or you could say, speaking to someone through a wall, the wall is vibrating, or speaking to someone underwater, you could try to speak and the water would propagate a little bit. And so people said, well, light must work the same way. Light needs something to transport it over a distance because it's also acting like a wave, similar to a sound wave. But there was a challenge with this, is they could not find it experimentally. There's a famous experiment called the Michelson-Morley experiment, where they tried to detect the Earth's movement through the ether by measuring the variations in the speed of light over different directions. So they thought, hey, if we go over a longer distance, we should detect that the speed of light is different, and a whole bunch of different things. And they came back and realized that the speed of light is exactly the same in every direction that they went in. So people are starting to think this ether, it can't. Maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe there's something else. And James Clerk Maxwell comes along as well and creates his groundbreaking theory of electromagnetism. And there's really no mention of the ether in it at all. And people are starting to wonder, how did he come up with an equation that works and we can measure, but there's no ether? So there's this, again, elephant in the room. Started with Newton. People are trying to equate how light and sound are kind of the same. And, this is where old school physicists were putting their foot in the ground saying, nope, the ether is there. It has to be there. Versus some of the new school physicists like Einstein are starting to say, okay, well, what if we take the ether out of it? Maybe we start from scratch and we try to build a theory up. And that's kind of the direction that Einstein starts to move in.
And maybe just a clarification on my part. When you say ether, is that like how would I better visualize that or understand it? Is that like a medium through which light is moving?
You got it. Yeah. So think of it like I was saying with sound, right? Sound needs something to transfer that sound wave. If you have empty space, sound can't move because there's nothing for it to essentially travel along, because sound is just vibrations of air. But they were saying the same thing for light. They're like, it needs something to travel along. It can't just move by itself. That doesn't line up with our theory. So part of what Einstein is able to discover is that there is no ether, that we don't need it for light to be able to travel. And so some of the things that he's able to figure out is the reason that people are seeing light kind of always moving in the same way. And it's really a kind of a crazy theory when you think about it. Not only is he saying that, yes, light, like we saw in the Michelson-Morley experiment, is constant no matter who's looking at it, but it also changes relative to the person who's viewing it. So for example, he did a thought experiment and he said, okay, say I'm running at the speed of light. There's a light wave in front of me. What happens if I catch up to this light wave? What would it look like? And in his head, he couldn't rationalize it. He said, that's impossible. How can I see something that's light without actually catching up to the speed of light? And so he was just like, this doesn't make any sense. And so what he basically came to the conclusion of was that light is moving at this constant speed. You can never catch up to it. And then he realized that time actually changes when you get close to the speed of light, which maintains that you would never be able to catch up to the speed of light because there's a whole bunch of crazy things that's happening with space contracting and all of these kind of crazy things. And that all comes together with E equals mc squared. So without getting into this special theory of relativity, because let's be honest, we're not the people to explain it. But at the end of the day, he's come to this point about how relativity, someone seeing something in a relative sense is important, but also how light, time, and space are all interconnected in such a way. And one of the great theories that he comes up with was, what if someone who's on subway train and I'm on the platform and I see somebody going by at 30 kilometers per hour, but then someone going on a subway car the other way is moving at 30 kilometers an hour. And you ask all three of those people, how fast was each of the things moving? Relative to them, they all see something different. And this was something physicists couldn't understand. They said, well, he sees it one way and he sees it the other way. There must be something else going on here. Where Einstein said, actually, they're all right, because we have to add in the relative elements of all of these pieces. So in this case, we've come to a point where we see this relative element to it. So it's not just, hey, everything's objective, like maybe Newton would have thought. Everybody's a little bit relative. And then the final last piece on this very brief and not great science lesson, but hey, this is what you get on a history podcast, is he finds out that space can actually bend light. This is one of the big things that happens, and space and time are kind of intersected. And so basically what makes Einstein an overnight sensation is there's a solar eclipse, and we know for a fact that there's some stars behind the sun that we shouldn't be able to see because it's sitting right behind it. However, if Einstein is correct, the light will actually bend around the sun and we'll be able to detect it. And that's exactly what happens. Is there's some experiments and they say, hey, we're seeing these stars. That means Einstein is correct. And, light bends around these large, gravitational objects such as the sun. And why this is all important is, for example, GPS technology. GPS technology is moving around at these satellites that are moving at a really high pace. And that's moving at such a high rate that there's some distortion in space, which is also time. And so we have to make some small adjustments to make sure that GPS is correct, because if we didn't, we'd be off by a few kilometers. So even today, Einstein's theories are very, very important. But that's kind of the theory of kind of what he's coming from. And if you're confused, you should be, because this is very, very difficult stuff. And it's not something you can explain in about 5 or 10 minutes. But I think it's important to understand that we're going from this world where, there's this ether and everybody's thinking of things that there's absolute reference points. And Einstein's saying, no, everybody has their own reference point, and space and time are interwoven together, and it can bend light, and light doesn't need an ether. It can just move through empty space. And it's a constant rate. And he's doing all of this with collaborating with colleagues, but also running these thought experiments where he's just able to think and say, okay, if this happens and this happens, what would happen in reality? Which, saves him a lot of money. He doesn't have to build these massive experiments. He can just use his brain, right? So this is kind of how he comes together, and really this propels him into superstar status within the scientific world.
It's pretty incredible, just like the emphasis and reliance on thought experiments to challenge conventional thinking about physics at the time. Like if you go back to the idea of like the ether, it sounds like there was just this acceptance of this thing that existed that we couldn't really measure or touch, but it was just assumed because, Newton's laws held for so long in 99% of cases that it was just assumed to be there. And he's like, no, something doesn't check out. The devil's in the details. There's this edge case that I have been pondering upon at the patent office that I think we need to talk about a bit more.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, hey, it worked. But, there's a few little things off to the side, but, what's the big deal, right? We don't need to deal with that. Or, yeah, we'll get there one day with our fundamental thinking. But like we said, it takes a radical to think differently. And, he becomes that superstar. But if anybody knows anything about dates, and we try to stay away from dates, but it is kind of important. So we have his special theory of relativity in 1905. In 1915, he comes up with his general theory of relativity. And then he comes up with the photoelectric effect, which he wins the Nobel Prize for in 1921. As many of you might know, the 1930s are around the corner. This is Germany. Einstein is a Jewish man. Things are starting to change, and he's seeing this as well, that there's going to be a big, big change coming in Germany, nowhere close to what he presumes is going to happen. But he's starting to think about, do I really have a future in Germany? Do I really need to make some changes? And I think that kind of takes him to this second part of his life where he's now a superstar, but he's not necessarily welcome, in his home country anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue. And it's probably worth mentioning just like we talked about his accomplishments and achievements, but that doesn't really, I think give us the entire breadth of his long-term career and what he was doing beyond just publishing papers. So obviously, he had a massive impact based on his scientific achievements, but it also involved, a series of very significant academic roles and deep deeply engaged political and social advocacy, which is something that I didn't know much about, but I think this actually just layers on a total, new addition of intrigue that I think most people wouldn't have thought about or would not be aware of just because of his prominence as a scientist. But if we're looking at his academic positions, so he held several prestigious positions across some of the, most premier academic institutes in Europe. So after his early years at the Swiss Patent Office, he accepted professorships in physics at the University of Zurich and Prague. Obviously, his reputation as a brilliant physicist led him to the University of Berlin, where he became a member of the Prussian Academy of Sciences. And again, these positions all kind of opened up and allowed him to focus intensively on research and collaborate with some of the most distinguished scientists of his era to continue to do the work and push the envelope and challenge conventional thinking. And in 1933, this is where he emigrates to the United States. So the political climate in Germany shifted dramatically with the rise of the Nazi Party, which, as we know, promoted very strict anti-Semitic policies. Einstein, who was Jewish, found himself in a very precarious position due to his heritage and public political stances. So he decided to emigrate to the U.S., a move that coincided with an offer from the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. At Princeton, from 1933 until his retirement in 1945, Einstein had the freedom to pretty much pursue anything he really wanted, from his scientific studies without the interference of any political oppression. And he focused on, this kind of unified field theory amongst many other topics that are way beyond my comprehension of science and or physics.
I think that unified field theory is an interesting one because when we look at physics, we have four forces. We have the two nuclear forces, we have electromagnetism and gravity. And there's always been this theory in physics that you could unify them all into one theory. And that's where Einstein spends the vast majority of the latter half of his life trying to investigate that. And even Einstein couldn't figure it out. And we haven't even figured it out today. So I think it goes to show that, he was never satisfied, right? He just continues to try to push the envelope and say, we can get to something more foundational than some of the theories that we have. And he wasn't able to get there, but, still publishing papers, still pushing the envelope, still challenging the rest of his colleagues to get to that next level. But I think for him, though, he's at that stage where I think if you've seen the movie Oppenheimer, he kind of mentions that, Einstein's past it, right? And there's a new physics that's coming in the quantum world, which Einstein didn't like. He made a comment that God doesn't throw dice, with that being that quantum mechanics has to do with a lot of probability. And Einstein didn't like that. He'd like more harder physics where you could say this will happen because the math checks out versus, hey, there's a 60% chance this is going to happen and a 40% chance. So he wasn't maybe a big fan of it and was actually wrong on a lot of occasions when he would start to think about that type of physics. But that's the beauty of science and this golden age of science where things are changing so quickly that even someone like Einstein, as groundbreaking as he was later in his life, maybe some of those newer theories passed him by a little bit. But, that's the beauty of science.
I think that's such a great underline to this whole episode. And we talk and specifically on technology, the history of technology, the history of science. We've talked about philosophers who had certain ideas about how the world worked or how the planet was shaped, and some of those hold for centuries, if not a millennia, until someone comes around and says, wait. That's not checking out anymore. We need to revisit this. And you kind of see that with science, right? And I think that's one of the best parts about scientific theory and empiricism is that everything is up for questioning until it is proven otherwise. And scientists have egos. We know that. We learned that from Oppenheimer. We learned that from Edison. We learned that from Tesla. It is just a part of the game. If you are, I don't want to call it a camp, but it seems like he was very entrenched in what he thought was right. But that doesn't necessarily stop someone else from coming along to challenge Einstein and his theories to further move the needle on what we actually know and understand.
Nobody that we've talked about, especially scientists, who's gotten to this elite level of intellectual knowledge isn't stubborn in some cases, because you have to be so obsessed over something and sometimes so unwilling to change that you push so far into one field, farther than anybody else would, or kind of ignore what other people are saying. And you don't hear about the physicists that spent 30 years chasing a theory that came out to be nothing. They definitely hear about the physicists like Einstein who spent their whole lives diving into a certain part of physics and discovering something new, right? So I think that's kind of your point there is perfect, because something new is going to happen. But you're right, with all these scientists that we've talked about, they all have that little secret sauce of just obsessing over something so unique to them, and then just being a bit stubborn, I think, at the same time.
And I think, it's probably not the most straightforward segue, but when we talk about being stubborn and like steadfast in your beliefs and opinions, I think one of the facets of his life that I found super intriguing, and I think we can kind of, dovetail this into the last part of the episode, is his political and social advocacy. This is something I wasn't aware of, and I don't know how many people are, but, obviously he had a huge impact on theoretical physics, but he also became a very prominent public figure in political and social advocacy. So a couple of things that really stood out to me were, he was steadfastly anti-fascist, which makes sense. And, he had a support for the Jewish homeland. He was very outspoken in terms of his criticism of fascism and Nazism, advocating for democracy and human rights. His experience, obviously, in Nazi Germany shaped his support for Zionism, which is kind of the movement for the establishment of a Jewish homeland. Although his vision for Israel was as a bi-national state where Jews and Arabs could coexist peacefully. And one of the things that I came across in my research, might just be interesting, a little footnote for our listeners, was that he was actually, after the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948, Einstein was actually offered the presidency in 1950 due to his global stature and active involvement in the Zionist causes. He declined the offer, stating that he lacked the natural aptitude and experience to deal properly with people and perform official duties.
I love that, because knowing Einstein, there's no way he could have done that type of job. Like, you have to deal with people who have 1% of the IQ of you and deal with people who are just, it's politics, right? Like, he would have hated it. But I think that's so interesting, because the fact that, Israel needs some legitimacy in its infancy, right? And hey, we can get, again, the rock star of science, the guy. He's one of us. Look at this, right? I think you can see why they tried to do it. But I think, for Einstein, it was more of a, hey, thanks, but no thanks sort of situation. But that's so fascinating that, something that's, top of mind today with the country of Israel, kind of going back to this time period, that, Einstein could have maybe had a bigger role in the state of Israel than he ended up doing. But it is interesting, because we do see this with a lot of scientists, right? Is sometimes some of them just want nothing to do with any social movements, but then some of them get right into it, and it's almost like becomes their second passion after, their core scientific research. We saw it with Oppenheimer and a lot of other scientists kind of around that time with, labor movements and stuff like that. It's more than just, into the books and that kind of stuff, which I think helps with the perception of physicists sometimes as just being 100%. Almost kind of dead fast, and this is what I do. They definitely have a lot of empathy for people around them, and they've changed the world scientifically. They maybe want to do it on a social level as well.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what you see with Einstein. So like, not only was he obviously an outspoken critic of like Nazi Germany, the fascist movement that were happening in Europe, but he was also a civil rights advocate in the US. So after he emigrated, he became increasingly involved in the civil rights movement. He was a member of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which colloquially we kind of refer to as the NAACP, and maintained a friendship with W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the founder of the organization. And he went on to publicly decry on numerous occasions racism as America's worst disease, quote unquote, and was known for, advocating for equal rights at a time when segregation was deeply ingrained in American society.
Something you love to hear, right? It's somebody who's back in that time and, comes out on the right side of history, which is nice to see. And for someone like him, right, understanding what happened to, what he would consider his people in Europe, and looking at another group of people who are being treated in a way of as a second class citizen. I think it's easy for him to empathize. And I think one thing we can see with Einstein is, the human experience is very important to him. And, his lack of involvement on not wanting to make a nuclear weapon or not wanting to be involved in the Manhattan Project. These are all things that you can see that, he understands the state of the world, but at the same time, he cares about the common man, at least, from the causes that he's, putting his effort and time into.
Yeah. And I think the last thing just on that point that I'll touch on quickly is that he was also very vocal in his support for disarmament and peaceful resolutions when it came to international conflicts, obviously reflecting his broader concerns about the dangers of nuclear weapons, following their use in World War II. This might be something we can quickly touch upon, which is the kind of this letter to Roosevelt. So in the summer of 1939, just before the outbreak of World War II, a European physicist and a group of European physicists were growing growing increasingly alarmed at the prospect of Nazi Germany developing an atomic bomb. So they felt there needed to be significant action and it was necessary to ensure that the U.S. did not fall behind in the nuclear arms race. So the letter obviously tried to communicate the importance of their cause, but lacked the necessary political connections to kind of get this letter in front of the right people. So they actually reached out to Einstein, who was living in Princeton, New Jersey at the time, and Einstein, understanding the kind of like the repercussions of what this meant, and at this point was recognized both for his scientific prestige and his pacifist leanings, was persuaded by the urgency of their concern. So the letter, which was dated August 2nd, 1939, which was drafted by these European scientists and signed by Einstein, was delivered to President Roosevelt in October of 1939. And the key points were around nuclear fission, kind of explaining the recent discoveries in the nuclear field of chain reactions, particularly in uranium, which could potentially lead to the quote unquote extremely powerful bombs of a new type, the importance of a uranium supply that essentially warned in the course of the last 4 months, it had become probable that a nuclear chain reaction could be set upon in a large mass of uranium, which would, create vast amounts of power and large quantities of new radium-like elements could be generated. He even went as far as talking about German advances in the nuclear arms race, and he recommended that the U.S. government should give attention to this critical area of atomic research and proposed that someone appointed by the government should be in constant contact with the group of physicists working on nuclear chain reactions in America. He suggested that this could lead to the U.S. securing ample supply of uranium and accelerating experimental work in chain reaction. He also emphasized, on a last note, the need for secrecy and increased funding to support the research.
It's so interesting as you've kind of went through on his pacifism. Like, I would imagine he would self-declare as a pacifist, someone who's very anti-war, but he's able to kind of shed that, maybe some of his ideals aside for this specific cause. And he, I'm sure, has a lot of people around him who he respects that were kind of, trying to convince him to support writing or at least signing this letter. It just kind of goes to his rock star status, right? Of, we couldn't get this in front of the president, something that's so important that if we get Einstein to sign, it's going to get on the president's desk. But, he's seen what Hitler and the Nazis are doing, firsthand. I guess it's a no-brainer at that point, but I'm sure he had some trouble with it, I would imagine, just based on, he knows the science, he knows what could be coming next and what eventually does come next, but probably very similar to Oppenheimer in that sense of, this is your duty, right? You have to do this, to save the world from the Nazis, because, we can look back in time, but the Nazis were defeated, but, back in the 30s and 40s, that was definitely not, there's definitely worry that this infection, I guess, of Nazism was going to spread, not just throughout Europe, but, throughout the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think it's a very pointed example of him literally putting his name on the dotted line to step up and denounce what he feels is wrong. And I think that really does speak to this kind of, not just humility, but this broader sense of humanitarianism that he is obviously very motivated by, and to do good and kind of leave a legacy where, there's this kind of sense of social justice and equality.
Yeah, and I think that's just within his character, right, of what he's able to do. And yeah, I think I keep coming away from Einstein of, we talk a lot about physicists and scientists. We've talked about Oppenheimer and Tesla and I guess Edison tangentially. None of them, I think, have maybe this kind of just softness and kind of maybe love for the human spirit that we can see from Einstein. I don't know if that's just, maybe us looking back and he's kind of has this level of status and maybe, we're putting two and two together. But I think his ability to go into the topics that he does and become so successful with it, but then also be able to take a step back and almost not have this massive ego that we see with a lot of other scientists, and to be able to look into some of these causes and try to help out, people who need help. And especially for someone, even to turn down the presidency of Israel, right? If he had this massive ego, I can do anything, right?
Yeah.
He probably would have said, let's do it. But he doesn't do that. And I think that puts him in a little bit of a different category for me. At least that's what I'm kind of taking away from it so far.
I would agree with you 100% there, Paul. I think back to our episode on Oppenheimer, and it was funny doing that research because, similar kind of idea. What do we know about him? There's just kind of one liner that we associate, father of the atomic bomb. But, Oppenheimer wasn't politically inclined any which way until much later in his life. And, largely after the fact is because he was implicated for being a communist, even though he went to a couple parties, but like he had no interest in politics at all. I don't even think he read the newspaper, like from what I remember. He just did not care about that type of stuff. He was very much interested in his work, his domain, his realm of expertise, and outside of that, most things didn't matter. But there's this kind of duality here with Einstein, which is like he is a rock star scientist. He is the guy. He has kind of, changed the foundation of science and our understanding of physics at the time. But then there's this other side of him, which is much more personable and almost like very human, that I don't think we typically associate with scientists, specifically with this kind of grandeur.
Yeah, even look at him too, right? You see the picture of him sticking his tongue out with the crazy hair and stuff. Yeah. Like he just seems like he just has this warm kind of demeanor about him. And I think that definitely goes to this rock star status. And I think I've even listened to him speak in English a few times, and he just has a very soft and warm, voice as well. So I think that all comes together with, he's not a cold, hard scientist who just, doesn't really emote very well. He seems like he can do all of that. And I think that's where I can kind of take away from, how did he get to such a rock star status, for outside of obviously being such a great physicist, is, he's relatable. He's someone people could say like, yeah, I could, go have a cup of coffee with Einstein. And as long as I didn't get him talking about physics, we could probably have a pretty good conversation.
Well, I think that's the funny part, like about someone like this, right? Because someone with this level of intellect can be very, not like threatening, but like it can be very,
can be a jerk, really. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, I know more than you.
Yeah, right? Yeah, exactly. Like going up to someone like that could be very intimidating for someone who's like a social activist. But, he is still, scientists all have their peculiarities, and it's might just be like a funny footnote to throw in there, because I always love like looking up random facts about the people that we research, because I think it just kind of humanizes them a bit more. He never wore socks. He hated socks. I don't know, it's just he hated them. He thought it was uncomfortable. He's like, why would I wear these? They provide no comfort. He also liked to smoke, so a lot of pictures of him with pipes. So to your point about having this kind of like humanness to him, to have a coffee, he might have had a smoke with you too while he discussed some of his social activism. And I think there's that kind of duality again, which like from a leadership perspective, there's this kind of like, there's these two fronts that I see, which is obviously like his intellectual academic leadership in the scientific community, but then there's also this other element when it comes to like humanitarianism, social justice, social advocacy, and the political influence that he's willing to kind of use his prestige to actually promote the causes he cares about, which all seem very well balanced.
I think that's a great way of putting it, and especially when we look at the leaders we've spoken about, there's always the ones that leave not just legacies long term, but even in their time, have that combination of that personal element to it, where people love this person for whatever reason. But then when it's time to get down to business, they're able to succeed in that sense too. And we sometimes see people who can get down to business really well, but don't really have that personal element, and they can struggle a little bit. Or someone who's, I think of a great politician who can speak and do all these great things, but doesn't actually get anything done. At some point, it catches up with them. And I think that's what Einstein's able to walk away from. He's someone who's very curious, obviously. He's very well-read, very well-informed, obviously brilliant and brilliant I can't even use the word brilliant. There's no word to describe the level of his intellect, right? And he's able to bring all of those together. And I think he fits in with a leader in the sense of leader of thought, but also leader of kind of what it means to be human on, the most, I would say, being able to ground yourself while kind of being at the top of the world when it comes to a whole bunch of different things, but not losing sight of kind of who you are as a person and who people around you want to see, and not going to a place where, your ego dominates and you're unable to kind of bring all of those elements together.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Paul. That's kind of my takeaway. I think the aspect of his scientific endeavors, and maybe the word revolutionary is where I would go, because I think he was in many regards. I think to have that balance with all of the other work that we just talked about around the social advocacy and his political causes, I think just really solidifies him in my mind as someone who's a great leader. He's an unconventional thinker, but sometimes, that's what you need to push the envelope and push the boundaries.
100%. I think that's a perfect way to wrap up for this week. So thank you everybody for listening. And I hope you learned something, or you're going to go learn a little bit more about relativity. And, remember to stay grounded when you come up with your brilliant theory of whatever you're going to accomplish later in life. But anyways, thanks everybody for watching or listening. And we'll see you all next time.
Thanks everyone. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the History in Motion podcast. If you enjoyed our journey through time, please subscribe, rate us, and share the podcast with friends. Your support helps keep history alive. Until next time.